So hi everyone, my name is Claire Dooley and I'm the technical manager for this side event on creating demand and changing behaviours for scaling up nutrition interventions, case studies from the Global South. This session will be chaired by Martin Pecker. Thank you so much for taking part in ANH 2022. We're looking forward to a really interesting discussion today. And just one quick reminder that everything that you might need to access in terms of the conference can be found on our website. So thank you so much, and I will hand over to Martin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Claire. So welcome again, everybody, to and for tuning into this side event entitled Creating Demand and Changing Behaviours for Scaling Up Nutrition Interventions, Case Studies from the Global South, hosted by the International Rice Research Institute. My name is Martin Pecker, and I'm the Senior Manager for Advocacy, Engagement and Communication at IRRI, and I'm pleased to officially welcome you and facilitate today's discussion. And joining me today is really an impressive and excellent roster of speakers from across the Global South, from Frontier Nutrition, from Nutrition International, the Philippine Rice Research Institute, the Alive and Thrive initiative of FHI Solutions, and of course ourselves, IRRI. So they'll each share best practices, challenges, and hopefully also some personal experiences in using social marketing and behavior change communication to mainstream nutrition across the food system through their work with their respective organizations. All this, as well as the discussion at the latter half of our program, will be taken from the lens of the Global South. Now, to kick off this exciting forum, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. He has more than 20 years of experience under his belt, leading research and engaging with policymakers on food systems transformation throughout Europe, Africa, and Asia. Currently, he's the research lead for markets, consumers, and nutrition at the International Rice Research Institute in Los Baños, the Philippines. And he's joining us today to speak more about the Drivers of Food Choice project. Please help me welcome Dr. Matti de Montt. Matti, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. Hello, everybody. So I'm Matti de Montt from the International Rice Research Institute. So today I will give you some of our major insights we got thanks to a Drivers of Food Choice project. I'm mentioning the donors here below. It was organized by University of South Carolina. It was a competitive grants program financed by BMGF, UK8. And so we got some very interesting insights with respect to rice. Because at the International Rice Research Institute, we focus on rice. So where does this all come from? So in 2019 was a pivotal point. The Eat Lancet Commission published its report. More than 820 million people have insufficient food. There is an urgent call for food system transformation. And one of the recommendations was to develop planetary health diets, basically substituting animal with plant proteins, among many other things. But the big question remains how to achieve this. So let's have a look at rice. Who are the rice eaters in the world? And we can see Asia bulging from rice consumption, and more specifically South Asia. Not so much because of high per capita levels here in yellow, but because of high population levels combined with rice consumption. And when we look at the triple burden of hunger, chronic, hidden hunger, and overnutrition, we also see that South Asia really pops out in all of the three problems. The triple burden of hunger is really very prominent in South Asia. So we looked at a study that has been conducted not so long ago of the Indian diet, and it's really based on a very big survey, consumer expenditure survey. 100,000 households from almost 8,000 villages and more than 5,000 urban blocks. And they concluded that Indians consume an excess amount of cereals and not enough proteins, fruits, and vegetables. Keep this in mind. This is going to be something, our baseline, which we will try to see how we can nudge consumers into the right direction. So one of the first things we realized is that when you look at consumer studies and nutrition studies, they often treat nutrition as something abstract almost. It's almost like people are eating ingredients, and which we thought is not the case. And especially for India, we believe that nutrition and eating behavior is part of a system, which we call the gastronomic system. And there are like 5 W's you can look at: where, food environment; who, culture, socioeconomic status; and then when, what, and why. And we believe there is a hierarchical system there that commands certain attributes and a nutritional content that eventually is going to be consumed. And all those layers, they are in fact providing entry points for nutrition interventions. So we believe that people do not eat just because they're hungry, but because there is a certain culture, socioeconomic status, and a food environment that commands certain eating occasions: breakfast, dinner, lunch, snacks. And those occasions determine dishes. On their turn, they determine ingredients, and so forth. So this is really the baseline starting point of our project. And we had 3 stages. First, we wanted to capture that gastronomic system. And we used experts there to really map when are people eating, what days, what occasions, what dishes, what ingredients, understanding it. And this is what we did through a consumer survey. And finally, we ran behavioral experiments to try to see whether we can nudge them into the direction of planetary health diets. So this is what I'm going to present today. So we did a study in Eastern India in 2 states, West Bengal and Orissa, and we focused on West Bengal for our behavioral experiment. And we tried to nudge consumers into the direction of planetary health diets. And we wanted to test nudges that can trigger behavioral change. So one of the things we did was we developed an app, a very simple food choice app that helps households plan their weekly diets. And this is really constructed using the gastronomic system. It has all the eating occasions, all the typical dishes, and those ingredients are subsumed in those dishes. And it's in fact a model of eating behavior in that state, in the state of West Bengal. And so it captures 155 unique dishes, 5 eating occasions, 7 weekdays. And this app allows them to budget their food choice using dishes as the unit of choice and subject to a budget constraint. And that's something we can start playing with that budget constraint, and we can learn a lot from that. So that forces each household to trade off nutrition with affordability. Another thing we did is we did this in 3 stages. We first let women, wives in households, make their food choice, then husbands, and then we asked them to do another round together as a couple. And that way we can see how their preferences and food choices differ and how they come up with joint decisions. So a few other things we did was we did 2 interventions. First, we did a random budget shock. We gave households a random budget that is typical for the area where they're living in. In rural areas, we randomized budgets in rural areas, and we randomized budget in urban areas. And this allows us to see how poor households react when they get a higher budget, and what rich households do when they get a lower budget. And a second thing we did is we exposed them to a video on the behavioral change communication, really explaining planetary health diets at the 3 levels: at the ingredient level, dish level, and occasion level. At the ingredient level, it tells us which ingredients we should substitute. At dish level, it's the same story, but at the dish level, what are the healthy dishes that we can substitute? And then finally, at the occasion level, it looks at how to organize your calorie intake over the day. So, findings. Remember the earlier findings that Indians consume an excess amount of cereals, not enough proteins, fruits, and vegetables. Let's see whether we were able to nudge them into the right direction. So here are some very basic results. I extracted a few results here. So behind there is an econometric model. I'm not showing all the details, the coefficients. I'm just showing the parameters and the variables that are found to be significant and their signs. So first of all, let's have a look at the budget constraint. When you artificially constrain households, you give them a lower budget than they used to be, they tend to gravitate towards the baseline foods. That is the starch-rich, pulse-rich, and vegetable-rich food, which is typically the chapati with the dal. And that's what you get when they're budget constrained. And you can see that it leads to diets that are high in carbs and low in fat. So partly budget constraints explains why those diets are so rich in cereals and less proteins, fruits, and vegetables. Now, Did information nudge consumers into the right way? We see some ingredient substitutions as a result of looking at our video. And we had a famous nutritionist explaining healthy diets, and we see some ingredient substitutions from animal to plant proteins. And we can see that overall, those informations, they increase the protein amount in their diets at the expense of carbs. But we also saw that the more information we add, the less significant effects we see. Maybe we overloaded them with information, and that's maybe something to keep in mind. We need to inform consumers, but maybe we should not overload them with information. Another thing we saw is that all those ingredient substitutions from animal to plant proteins, they went at the expense of fruit. So that's something to keep in mind, that we should keep fruit as a very important component in those diets, in our messaging. Now, when we look at gender differences, we see that husbands, they tend to behave a bit like budget constraint, as if they are budget constrained. And that's a bit interesting. They have very similar pattern. Wives, on the other hand, tend to counteract that a bit. They tend to reduce intake of pulses a bit relative to man, and they tend to keep some more savings. And generally, wives tend to construct more protein-rich diets. But then we saw something interesting as well. Education of the wife tends to gravitate households toward more starch-rich diets and less vegetables and fruits. So it almost looks like the more educated wives in the households, they tend to be some of the explanation factor that explains why Indian diets are so rich in cereals and not enough proteins, fruits, and vegetables. So this is something that we need to investigate more further. And then finally, we see some income effects in weekends, in urban areas. They tend to consume more non-veg, more dairy at the expense of others. So these are kind of very general findings that are consistent. So conclusions, we see that budget constraints definitely are part of the reason. We also learned that nudging is not that straightforward. We triggered some substitutions, but those substitutions, they were weakened. So we think we may have overloaded consumers with too much information. And we also found that fruits tend to be the sacrificial lamb. And we saw that those substitutions, they went at the expense of fruit intake. So we also recommend to complete those budget planning apps with real randomized controlled trials to capture actual behavior. And then finally, in the case of golden rice, we will hear more about that. We believe that a similar approach is necessary. We need to look at the entire system of food consumption. And that gives us several entry points for introducing golden rice, not just as a substitute for rice, but also we need to construct dishes that are centered around golden rice, occasions. We need to intervene in the food environment, and maybe also make sure that golden rice is introgressed into varieties that have sensory attributes that are desirable for consumers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matti. It's an incredibly interesting project. I know we've had many discussions about it, so it's great to see this. To the members of our audience, you will get the opportunity to address your queries for Matti and the rest of our speakers at the Q&A portion of the program. On to our next speaker. He is a social, traditional, and content marketer and a communications expert with 22 years of cross-organizational, fast-moving consumer goods expertise in emerging markets in India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. Here to present on food fortification, please welcome the COO of Frontier Nutrition and Care Nutrition Limited, Frontier Nutrition's Bangladesh-based operating subsidiary, Mr. Hindal Roy. And Mr. Roy, over to you.
Thank you. I would thank all the participants as well as the panelists for this wonderful discussion and take this opportunity to share my presentation. It was excellent to hear from West Bengal. I'm basically from West Bengal, India, though presently I'm based out of Dhaka. And here we will speak about a nutrition intervention with a slightly different perspective. We heard about the rice, golden rice. Here, I will speak about the nutrition intervention in Bangladesh perspective. Since we work in Bangladesh, so I would love to give the example of Bangladesh and what we do and how we do. So if I before we start, give you an idea about the nutrition situation in Bangladesh, that may help us to understand a lot about our work. Bangladesh, as we all know, is the most densely populated country in the world, which is moving from LDC, least developed country status, to a middle developed country status. But unfortunately, more than half of the population suffers from malnutrition. And severe acute malnutrition affects 450,000 children, while 2 million children has moderate acute malnutrition. 52% of the children have anemia. 41% of the children have stunted. 16% of the children under 5 are wasted. 36% of the children are underweight. A quarter of the women have short stature. So we can understand that we are dealing with a situation of malnutrition, which is prevalently very highly in the society, starting from child malnutrition to adolescent malnutrition to anemia in pregnant and lactating women. And this malnutrition is estimated to cost Bangladesh more than $1 billion every year in productivity. So again, what we do as a company, we have taken the vision to tackle this malnutrition through innovative, nutritious and delicious product that can be sold as a snack food that every child can enjoy, every parent can trust, and every family can afford. And we have taken a mission to support families across Bangladesh and help a new generation of people to be healthy, happy, and ready to build a worthy future which is free from malnutrition. And as a part of action, we manufacture super affordable fortified snacks, drinks, chocolates, which provide necessary nutrition to the targeted mass without sacrificing any kind of taste, as well as leading to a healthier option. And the impact, we reach the vulnerable population with our products. Now, if I go forward, if I show you the kind of product that we deal with fortified bread spreads, we deal with fortified saline powder, we deal with lipid-based nutritional supplements, we deal with chocolates. So all kinds of food which can be enjoyed across the society spectrum, morely targeted and skewed towards children, morely targeted and skewed towards adolescents, as well as pregnant and lactating women. Now, if I speak to you about our areas of operation, where we operate in Bangladesh, it is to a large extent dependent on the stunting and the underweight population sphere. In the slide, you can see that this is especially in the northern part, in the southern part, and similarly, our distribution is also in accordance to it, because understanding the mission that we are in, to tackle malnutrition through fortified snacks, it really makes sense for us to be in areas where malnutrition is the most prevalent. And if I tell you the reach metrics, we have till the year 2021, we have been able to reach around 27.6% of the population under age of under 5 having a stunting problem. And we have reached to the 30% of the highest need population. And if this total slide will tell you that we cover at least 65,66,000 people per week through our nutritional intervention, which itself is a huge number. And if I tell you about the impact that we as a company sold around 24 million products in 2021. And this year, in the first quarter, we sold around 5 million. And in the next 2, 3, 4 quarters, we hope to take this to 50 million. And similarly, there are also economic metrics that our distributors generate. And the most important part of it is that we all know that Bangladesh has a huge Rohingya refugee problem, which has been one of the burning issues since 2016. Through our intervention, we had been able to reach 270,000 households, supplying them fortified foods with the help of the World Food. In the year 2022, we assumed that we would take this number to 405,000 households. And as the year progresses, we hope to take it further. So if you see our product range that we provide up to 30% of regular dietary allowance through our products. So the number, this also shows the number of people that has been receiving 30% RDI from our products. And if I tell you, we want to keep it simple, we want to keep it very straight, that starting from 27% of the population, by 2025, we want to reach 75% of the vulnerable population, especially children who are exposed to stunting or underweight. And if I tell you the people covered per week in million from 6.5 million at the 2021, we hope by 2025 we would be able to impact 30 million people per week. And that in terms tells a lot about the mission of the company. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your hearing. I'd be open to questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. We did see one question, which I hope we'll be able to address once we get into the Q&A. Now,
Sure.
on to our third speaker. Our third speaker is a physician with 27 years of experience in public health, and has been working in the areas of primary health care, child immunization, and micronutrient deficiencies in developing countries. As Deputy Regional Director for Nutrition International Africa, he has been strategically contributing to the overall planning, management, and program decision-making in the region. Please allow me to welcome Dr. Abdulaziz Adish to speak on dietary diversity. Dr. Adish, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Okay, I will present more on the food diversity. So the outline is I will give a detail, a highlight of the nutrition situation in Africa, then cases on dietary diversity, challenges, and what the future will look like for behavior change intervention for food diversity. So overall, African Union did a cost of hunger study, and this is what they found. 7 of the African countries, only 7 have below 90% stunting and 5% underweight. Almost 38 countries have anemia in women, more than 30%. 18 countries have at least 50% of infants are exclusively breastfed, something that is as simple as breastfeeding is not really taken well. 20 countries have 70% prevalence of vitamin A deficiency. So this is the status. And this is to show you that really in Africa, people are not consuming healthy diet. So the deep brown ones are countries that consume 80 to 100% not healthy food. So almost most of Africa is deep brown, which means most people over 80% consume inadequate diet or diet dominated by one kind of starch or monocrop. So these are countries that consume inadequate diet overall and lack food diversity or dietary diversity. So NI works in most of those countries, but we have offices in almost 10 countries, and we work on IYCF in these countries, and we really work a lot on food diversity, food fortification, and how to address overall micronutrient deficiencies. So I just wanted to show some of the micronutrient deficiency problems like iodine deficiency, vitamin A deficiency, signs and symptoms, but I don't want to try, to waste your time on the signs and symptoms for each and every micronutrient deficiency. But I would like to assure you that most of the African countries have high amount of these deficiencies considered by WHO as public health problems. So micronutrient deficiency is a public health problem in almost those countries you have it seen in brown. So overall, the problem we have is single approach for micronutrient deficiency. Micronutrient deficiency has to be tackled with several interventions. Like, we have dietary diversification, food fortification, nutrition education, crop biofortification. So you have to do all of these interventions according to WHO's advice. And most of the problem I face when I visit African countries is, their belief that their country is very rich in fruits and vegetables. And the only thing they need is to teach people to eat fruit and vegetables. So whenever we go for a programming in Africa, they will tell us, okay, give us that amount of money that you are investing for fortification or for supplementation. We will grow vegetables and fruits and we teach our people to eat them. But we know how difficult it is and how comprehensive and approach is important than simply one approach. So dietary improvement is the most important sustainable approach, but it has to start with supplementation when the problem is so huge like in Africa. So all the interventions have their place in Africa. With time, when countries develop economically and when people are educated and when we are sure that people diversify, the other programs like, slowly can give up, like specifically supplementation. But in time when others are not up the notch, then stopping public health measures and supplementation will really lead to a problem. So why do what do African foods or diet lack most? They are mostly plant-based cereals, mostly like maize and rice. And as you know, it is a bulk, but it is not micronutrient dense. And the biggest problem for us is in children, the stomach content is very limited. And from the bulk of cereals and rice they take, it is really completely impossible to get the vitamins and the vitamins and minerals they need. So the foods are not dense, so they require dense food. But in most African countries, children from breastfeeding, they directly jump to adult food, or if there is a complementary food, it is usually monocrop or wheat or, which is not dense enough. And that is what leads to the problem in children. And most of these lack protein, essential fats, wide range of vitamins and minerals, and mostly they are poor in micronutrients like vitamins, vitamin A, and bioavailable nutrients like iron and zinc. So these are really the important ones that they have to get either as a supplement or as a fortificant, or somehow they have to diversify their food. It's energy sufficient, but not nutrient dense, as I said. Micronutrient rich animal source foods are prohibitively expensive. So that's why children do not get. So this, I wanted to show that, the nutrients that are important in our nutrition, iodine, zinc, iron, calcium, if you see most refined cereals or even cereals that are not refined, lack these. So if we give only cereals and especially, processed cereals, then children will get nothing unless they have milk added or eggs added to it or fruits and vegetables. So that is why mostly the African diet is limited to one crop or maybe two, but it doesn't usually include fruits and vegetables and meat, fish, and poultry. So the objective of overall dietary diversification is to bring these groups of foods as much as possible into a household's diet. So we have what we call food-based approach, which is mostly, dietary diversification and food fortification. And people most of the time say, okay, all we need is to educate our population and then they will diversify. But it is not as easy. So that's why we are recommending that a combination of strategies have to be implemented in Africa to show some effect. So food diversification, I don't want to go into the detail of definition. It's to make sure that households consume food which is both adequate energy and also gives them the vitamins and minerals required. So mostly that has fruits and vegetables and some animal source proteins. So these are some indicators that are used to measure food diversity at household level to make sure that the diet has enough quality, minimum dietary diversity, women dietary diversity scores. So these are to show indicators to show some dietary quality. In our effort, in our IYCF program, we really promote integrated behavior change model utilizing 2 or more theoretical operations. We use individual, interpersonal, and community level interactions. In most of our
Dr. Adish, sorry to interrupt. You have about 1 minute left. May I ask you to please?
Okay. So as I said, the most important component is food or animal source food. And as you know, this is United States have calculated and showed that animal farming is responsible for greenhouse gases. And in 2006, FAO did a study and they showed that 80% of global warming is due to the same. So the trend as we see in most countries, it might not be true in Africa, but animal farming is becoming expensive and animal protein is also becoming expensive. So there is one important resource that we Africans are missing on specifically for protein or animal source protein. This table shows the quality of protein and calcium and iron content comparing minced beef with some insects. Caterpillar has 28 grams of protein per 100 gram, while minced beef has 27. Grasshoppers have 35 milligrams of calcium compared to none in minced beef. So as you see, all 3 insects have better quality of protein and better calcium and iron, which is really very important ingredient in Africa. So the simple thing is just drying of insects, turning them into powders and sprinkle them in the bulky foods that children consume, like ugali in Kenya. So all you need is, if you have your ugali, put some insect powders into them, then they will get their animal source and the food will immediately be rich in micronutrients. It will be micronutrient dense. So this has caught up in several countries. Unfortunately, in Africa, it didn't. These are burgers in one of the Western countries made of insect products. And even the World Food Program recognized the importance of this, and they have a guideline supporting farmers as to how to use this rich resource that we have in Africa. So as I am told, it's not new to Africa. People use it to consume insects every now and then, but it is with modernization and colonization that this great behavior has been lost. So our behavior change communication and behavior change interventions will have to identify alternative source of protein, animal protein, and I think this will give the best opportunity as animal protein and protein source. So I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Adish, for that very, very informative and interesting presentation. Our next presenter is currently the Chief Science Research Specialist at the Development Communication Division of the Philippine Rice Research Institute. He leads its Golden Rice program, which was established to oversee and implement the pilot deployment in selected provinces across the Philippines of golden rice. Here to discuss communication and stakeholder engagement support for biofortification is Dr. Ronan Zagado. Over to you, Ronan.
Okay, good evening, Martin and everyone. So it's evening in this part of the world. So from my end, as mentioned by Martin, I will be sharing our experience on the role of communication and stakeholder engagement towards regulatory success and pilot scale deployment of golden rice in the Philippines. We are implementing this project in close collaboration with the International Rice Research Institute. Yeah, first thing first is, what is golden rice? Now, golden rice is basically an ordinary rice improved with nutritional value. It contains beta-carotene, which is converted into vitamin A as needed by our body. So since rice is a staple food among Filipinos, it can really be a sustainable source of vitamin A. And that is why we are promoting it now as a complementary approach to help address vitamin A deficiency in the Philippines. Golden rice was in development for a long time. It was a long journey for the project, almost 20 years of painstaking research and regulatory reviews. And I would say that the narrative of golden rice was quite varied and complex. Every phase of the project has offered unique situations and challenges that we need to deal with. As a subject matter, it was quite challenging to communicate being a product of modern biotechnology, which a lot of people find to be highly abstract and too technical to understand. Besides, it's novel that is not easily acceptable, as people have already preconceived notions that are hard to change. So communication plays a central role in the implementation of the Golden Rice project. We need to speak strategically, otherwise someone else will and will probably get it wrong. We need to communicate factual science-based information and encourage informed decisions of the issues. At each stage of the project, we develop communication plans to support the attainment of each of the milestones, from research, regulation to deployment. For research, for instance, our focus then was to raise awareness on science and transparency. For regulations, we did extensive stakeholder outreach to gain support to our regulatory applications. And now for deployment, we are geared towards social marketing. We are positioning the product as a promising intervention to complement existing nutrition programs to address vitamin A deficiency. And not to mention, we also develop a risk communication plan and activate it whenever there are issues and urgent situation. Our target was to induce behavioral change towards product acceptance, and it requires multi-level communication and engagements from policy, environment, community to individual. And we believe that for us to be able to effectively communicate is to engage and commit with our stakeholders. So we won't just end up after informing or communicating with them, but we make sure that we engage and mobilize them to a certain cause. And this was evident during the regulatory phase, where we collected statements of support from our stakeholders and even transformed them into ambassadors or champions to help us amplify our call for support. And for us to be able to effectively engage them, we need to commit. We need to establish that level of good and meaningful relationship with them. In addition, we do our work in a targeted manner, and we make sure that we are transparent, accurate, timely, our messaging tailored fit to our different audiences, and we engage in a supportive and collaborative manner. We inform using interpersonal and media-centric approaches, engage with multi-level stakeholders from farmers, media, youth to policymakers through different platforms, and we commit towards community welfare. An example of our communication intervention is during the announcement of the final regulatory approval of golden rice. During that time, we made sure that we are in full control of the conversation surrounding golden rice. So we prepared and implemented a communication plan to gain favorable public response on regulatory biosafety approval for commercial propagations of golden rice last year. And one of the strategies was to mobilize our media network to publish positive stories, because we were anticipating then that there would be oppositions from the activists that would come out even stronger than before. And indeed, there was an online protest. But apparently, based on this result, we were able to take control of the conversations. And currently, we are taking the necessary steps towards deployment. And our aspirations is to bring golden rice to the tables of those who need it the most. And our strategy has always been targeted. We continuously conduct public awareness, especially in our pilot scale deployment areas, and to ensure that the project will be strongly supported and facilitated in the community. We've carried out policy outreach. We drafted and pitched local resolutions to the concerned local government units. And we paid much attention to this policy outreach after finding out that the anti-GMO groups have also intensified their policy advocacy work to stop the cultivation of golden rice. So at this stage of the project, our messaging is focused on safety, product availability, and sustainability. For my final slide, allow me to share some lessons and challenges. Communication is not a one-size-fits-all. You need to be mindful of the specific goals of the project and develop the necessary communication support. Media is very powerful. Make sure that you have them on your side. And thirdly, you have to seriously invest in messaging, anticipate possible questions, and prepare holding statements that you can draw when you are asked by the media and some dignitaries. And next, we need social license to operate. So we need to build and nurture relationship. And engaging with the public is a long process. So we just have to be patient. And then lastly, policy support is key. You need to learn how to navigate the political environment to seek support for your project. And our experience with golden rice is that most of the issues can be anticipated. So work that out and prepare, and you don't have to do it all yourself. You can mobilize your champions to speak on your behalf. And I believe that they are actually the best spokesperson that we could ever tap. So I think that ends my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zagado. And on a personal note, I do feel very privileged to be able to witness firsthand the very thorough work that Phil Rice is doing here in the Philippines on distributing golden rice. So thank you very much for that. To complete our series of presenters and to speak on the breastfeeding and complementary feeding case study is a public health professional with 15 years of work experience, with 15 years in Asia and Africa in technical areas such as nutrition, health system strengthening, and gender. She's worked at all levels of the health system, from community to district to national levels, on nutrition and maternal and child health issues. Please help me welcome Dr. Manisha Tharane, West Africa Director for the Alive and Thrive initiative at FAHI Solutions.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be sharing the Alive and Thrive approach for leveraging data and knowledge exchange to improve infant and young child feeding. I think our last speaker made a really important point about communication has to be tailored to the program, and one size does not fit all. So I'll be talking a little bit broadly about the approach that we use and using data in particular to improve breastfeeding and complementary feeding programs. So my presentation is quickly going to touch on how do we use data to improve breastfeeding and complementary feeding programs. What are the different stages of behavior change? So as you can see from this graph on this diagram to the right, we use a 5-step process to influence infant and young child feeding practices, and data really underpins each step of the way. And I'll also be sharing some resources at the end that can be used for this approach. So step 1 really consists of understanding the situation and understanding why people do what they do in terms of breastfeeding and complementary feeding practices. For this, we generally conduct 3 kinds of analysis to begin with. We work very closely with the governments to first understand what are the trends for breastfeeding or complementary feeding practices in the country. For example, we did look at dietary diversity in one of the previous Dr. Abdullah Dish's slides. So we really try and understand what is the situation in country. And if needed, we also conduct a secondary analysis to better understand what are some of the determinants of the infant and young child feeding practices. Do they vary in the country by regions? Is it wealth? Is it women's education? What are some of the factors that we can change? Is it religion? Or some of the other factors that influence these breastfeeding and complementary feeding practices? The second step is looking at what already exists in the country. And then in order to do that, we conduct literature reviews to understand what has been studied and what are the gaps. And based on this, we may conduct additional primary research in the form of formative research to really understand what are the barriers and perceptions, why do people do what they do. And, and with the formative research, we often look at both traditional and non-traditional ways of collecting data. So we might just use semi-structured interviews, focus groups. We might use ranking to understand people's food choices. We also use a method called trials of improved practices, dietary recall. And all of this really helps understand not just the trends and what are the current practices of breastfeeding and complementary feeding, but also why people do what they do. The next step really consists of putting this data to good use. So we mine the data and we use the socio-ecological model, which really places the mother and the caretaker at the center of the model, but recognizes that she is not alone in influencing breastfeeding and complementary feeding practices. So it's very important to understand that her decisions are based on the larger society, her household, as well as the community. So we use the data to really understand what are the social norms that exist at the community level, what are the rules that guide her behavior, how does culture and beliefs influence her behavior, what does she think are the perceived risks, so what will people think if she adopts such a behavior, as well as the descriptive norms, that is, will other people approve or disapprove if she adopts a particular behavior. And here we're talking specifically around breastfeeding and complementary feeding. We also look at the behavioral aspect from the individual, so from the mother or the caretaker's point of view. So does she have the knowledge to practice the behavior? Does she have the skills, the confidence, the self-efficacy? And more importantly, when it comes to complementary feeding in the food environment, we try to understand what is the desire as well as the perceived risks of adopting a certain behavior. Step 3 consists of creating. And here again, we use the formative research, the secondary analysis, and the literature review to really design our programs. I'd like to mention that we really put a lot of focus on key messages and small doable actions. As we mentioned, communication is not a one size that fits all, and we've realized that it's really, really critical to break down messages depending on the audience and also define them by small doable actions. Here, I'd like to give you an example from the work that we've done in West and Central Africa, where we realized that one of the biggest barriers to exclusive breastfeeding is the practice of giving water to children. As many of you know, in West and Central Africa, it's very hot, and there's a very common misperception or a perceived norm that providing water can really is critical to save the lives of children. And as we know, this is a big barrier to exclusive breastfeeding. So we really looked at data, and we came up that this practice was one of the biggest challenges to exclusive breastfeeding. And we worked with countries and governments to just use the simple message of not providing water to really improve exclusive breastfeeding practices. The other things we do when creating and designing our program is to better understand what are the platforms that exist. So how do we reach out to mothers, to fathers, to caretakers, to the community at large? And here, based on the data, we use health systems, we may use agriculture extension workers or food systems to reach out to fathers and other influential groups, for health workers and community agents to reach out to mothers. We also work with village leaders and different members of the health system as well as the food system. Here, I'd also like to underscore that we recognize that it's not just that it's critical not just to influence mothers and communities, but also reach out to politicians and decision makers, because they're the ones who set the policies, and they're critical to really change the enabling environment for breastfeeding and complementary feeding. The fourth step consists of implementing and monitoring. And this is the stage where we actually use the design in terms of the platforms that we've identified to train different health workers. We often use a strategy called co-designing, where we work with district stakeholders as well as regional stakeholders to design a program that would help change these practices at the community level. We also put a lot of emphasis on monitoring, and in monitoring, we look at the progress, we look at whether our target population is being reached, whether they're being reached with in large volumes. We look at how the data is being used to make decisions, so whether based on the performance of health workers or agriculture workers, we can set targets and help them reach more people. We also use data to make changes to the program. So we look at what's working, what's not working, how can we tweak our program to make sure that we reach more people. We hold managers at the district level, maybe at the facility level, responsible for coverage and quality of services. And recently, we've been working very closely with governments to include nutrition or health indicators into routine government systems so that it becomes part of their monitoring system and can be used to really understand the coverage of programs and how to reach more and more people to bring about behavior change. Finally, the last step is really about evaluating and using the data to replan. So wherever possible, we conduct midterm and final evaluations. We recognize that this takes a lot of funding. So we also work very closely with governments to look at national data and understand where the breastfeeding and complementary feeding practices have changed with the social and behavior change processes that have been put in place. Another thing that we've learned is it's very important to understand the exposure to various channels. So as we design our program, we work through the health system, the food system, the social protection system, as well as community events and mass media. And we try and measure what is the exposure of mothers or fathers to these different platforms. Our study, and you can see that in the graph to the right, our findings have shown that there's a very strong dose-response relationship. So the greater the exposure of mothers, fathers, and communities to different platforms, the greater the behavior change. This is my final slide, and I just wanted to highlight that in our work at Alive and Thrive, we have shown that it is possible to rapidly change and improve breastfeeding and complementary feeding practices like dietary diversity that's shown in the graph by using data and really working through the processes and using data to help us every step of the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tarane, for that. I apologize. We may have been a little bit ambitious in our time calculations, and we had hoped to kind of go a little bit more in depth with each of the presenters on some specific questions. But we are running out of time. But I would like to just wrap up the session and give each of our speakers the mic to answer the final question in about 30 seconds. What changes do we need to see at the individual and institutional level in order to make nutritious foods more accessible? I would like to perhaps start with our keynote speaker, Matti.
Hello, yes. From our perspective, what we learned is we need to first do our homework better and understand the system better of food consumption and understand that it's a system. And we need to work with gastronomy and food scientists. We need to merge those sciences, bring them together and make sure that healthy food is attractive. We should not forget the hedonic pleasure component and affordable. I think this is that would be my take home message.
Thank you. Thank you, Matti. I would like to invite Dr. Adish.
Thank you so much. In my experience, going around to clinics where feeding programs or child weighing programs go, my observation is that, mothers who are obese coming with a child who is stunted. what this shows you is that, it's not availability or lack of availability of funding. It is an issue of where to spend that specific money. Mothers consuming a lot of sugary diets, sugary foods, and not spending that money on fruits and vegetables, and then not giving it to their children is really lack of knowledge and not lack of love. So I think with this double burden of a disease, policy makers have to help really the population by having a good policy of, avoiding or taxing or punishing of these sugary products, and with whatever revenue generated, assisting other healthy diets to be at least cheaper and available. I think that kind of a policy will help, and also avoid, for both, for the mother and for double burden of the disease. Obesity is really increasing significantly in Africa. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Adish. In the interest of time, I would like to invite Dr. Zagado, then Mr. Roy, and then Dr. Tarane to have their intervention, please.
Yeah, what changes? Well, at the individual level, we envision a fully informed farmer and consumer who is empowered to make decisions for themselves after appreciating the many options that are available to them. And then at the institutional level, we need an enabling environment to make these options accessible to end users. And it is important that we continue partnering with relevant organizations. And we need to also harness the existence of platforms such as this, the ANH for knowledge sharing and synergy, so we can learn from various perspectives and disciplines. And together we can continue to advocate for open-mindedness and acceptance of innovations and sustained partnership for broader impact.
Mr. Roy?
On an individual level and as an institutional level, I really believe working in the nutrition field has given us some insights. One of them is that nutrition is a very vast subject. Malnutrition is a too big a problem, but there aren't sufficient education and understanding at the government level with the kind of impact that is we are trying to do. And so we are trying to fight with traditional foods without any support at the government level or maybe from the tax authorities due to the special kind of food, special kind of snacks that we produce. And maybe here a couple of things may help. One is educating the customer, both at the institutional level, at the government level, spreading information, because we are too small a company to do that unless and until it is done at the governmental level. And recognition also is pretty important in terms of recognition, in terms of tax breaks, which will help us to move to a larger population, to move at a faster speed, reach at a faster pace. I think these kind of interventions would help our cause in the next, if taken in the next few years.
Thank you. Dr. Tarane?
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to highlight that both from an individual and an institutional level, it's really critical to design programs related to behavior change with the community, with the individuals that it affects, as well as with at different levels of the system. So we really encourage using methods such as co-designing with the community to bring about longer-term sustainable change. And as I mentioned, it's really critical to use data to inform the processes and look at what the trends are and how to bring about changes. The other thing that I did want to highlight and spotlight is particularly in the COVID pandemic and in generally, we find that there are lots of marketing tactics that are being used by companies, such as promotion of formula. And it's really important to work with governments to ensure that they monitor these violations, because there is a lot of marketing of breast milk substitutes, and they're promoted in a way that's not very sustainable, that's not very good for breastfeeding practices in countries. So I'd just like to highlight that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Dr. Tarane, for that. I would like to thank all of our speakers. We are unfortunately out of time, but I really do hope that that our attendees will be able to take home some practical steps, some good practices, and get a deeper appreciation, I think, as well, of the intricacies behind nudging individual behaviors, institutional behaviors as well, and making those shifts towards better nutrition choices. I'd like to thank our speakers for their time and sharing their excellent and meaningful work, and what their respective organizations do on this to this end. Please, let's use the ANH platform to continue the discussions. Just because the session isn't over doesn't mean we can't continue the discussion. I think we can go on for hours and hours. So please do, and we really do look forward to hearing more from you. As we mentioned in the chat, please feel free to reach out to any of us through the platform if you have any additional questions or suggestions. And rests me to say thank you very much for attending, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.